welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I am so excited today. I am here. My name is Jenn, first of all. I forgot that part. I was so excited. And I am here today with the author of one of my favorite novels of the past several years and many short stories that I love, who is here to talk about a gorgeous collection of fiction and poetry that is hitting your shelves soon. It will be out there at the time that you hear this. So let's talk about it. Welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yes, hello. My name is Amal El-Mohtar, and my book is called Seasons of Glass and Iron, named after the one of the short stories that's in it.
I always start with the question about your journey as a writer and your other writing. In particular, I'm kind of curious about when a writer knows that it's time for another collection.
Oh gosh. Well, in this case, there was a lot of pragmatism about it because my very first publication was this tiny book called The Honey Month, which was published by a micro press called Papaveria Press that Elizabeth Yellowboy started and has a lot of really beautiful, like tiny art books, basically, and like handmade, hand-bound, beautiful objects. And this was like gosh, when 2009, when I reached out to Elizabeth about doing this, and it was a very like experimental collection. It was all based around the fact that a friend had given me a gift of 28 different kinds of honey, and so I wanted to sample one a day and just write something spontaneous for each one of them over the course of a single February. And Elizabeth published this, and so I had this tiny collection. I was like 22, 23 when it came out, I think. And that was, at the same time that I was writing a bunch of short stories. So I was exclusively a writer of short stories and poetry for, almost 50, about 15 years, I guess. By the time This Is How You Lose the Time War came out, or rather, Max Gladstone and I co-wrote This Is How You Lose the Time War together as a fun project for the two of us to do. Not, I mean, we had aspirations of what would happen with that book that we joked about a lot, but it was still something that we were just doing to please ourselves. And that, we ended up getting it published, and everything that that book has done in the world has been a tremendous joy and wonder and kind of just, it just feels like a miracle to me that kind of goes on. But then the kind of pragmatic publishing realities kick in of I was offered a four-book deal with Tor to with the like attached to The River Has Roots, which was like my solo debut, my novella that came out last year. And I've never written a novel. So, the prospect of writing four books, well, one of them was written, the prospect of writing three more books on kind of nebulous timeline was daunting. And so I thought, well, this is surely the time to collect those short stories that I've been writing for 15 years. And perhaps one of the remaining books could be a short story collection. And it felt like a good capstone. Like it felt like the right moment to do that because at that point in time, I just my writing of short fiction had really slowed as I was doing lots of other kinds of writing. Like Max and I have been working on like screen adaptations of Time War for initially we were doing TV stuff, now we're doing film stuff. We have another project in the works together that is still secret. But so there's just been a lot of other longer form stuff happening. So I haven't really been writing much short fiction. So it felt like collecting everything that I had done into a book and saying, "Behold, this is my short fiction oeuvre." That felt like the right moment to be doing that. So even though it technically is, another collection post the Honey Month was its own thing, and Seasons of Glass and Iron feels more like this is the short story writer that I was for 15 years while I was, becoming the person who I am now at this moment. So having that bound and in this very beautiful edition that I love so much, this cover is so gorgeous. Just feels like a really good thing to have at this moment.
It is a gorgeous cover and it's an absolutely beautiful volume. Looking at such a large span of time and work over such a span, it feels to me like it would be, intimidating and perhaps even emotional, like were there things that you learned about your own writing from revisiting it with a lens toward a collection?
Yes. Yes, very much. The only thing in this collection that is original to it is the introduction that I wrote trying to marshal those feelings. In particular, I think there's something I say in the introduction that's like 15 years is a lot of time to be generous towards. Because you look at, I've always had this observation about juvenilia where I feel like juvenilia is basically whatever you wrote 8 years ago, or at least that's how it felt in my 20s and 30s. Maybe I will feel differently now that I am older than that. But it was just there was this feeling that whatever you're working on right now is like the culmination of everything that you have been until this moment, and then some time passes and you look back on it and you go, you know, I see who I was. There's just distance enough. I've also often felt blessed to be a writer who, like, I genuinely like my work. I don't feel tormented by the youthfulness of it in the past. Like, I feel very tender towards it. So I feel like I've got that going for me in terms of like looking at the collection. But in general, just being generous towards, I don't know, stances or craft elements or various things was very much part of this. I knew that I wanted to collect my favorite stories from that span of time, but there are also things that just feel important to me because of where I was when I wrote them or where they fit in a kind of internal landscape of my own figuring myself out as a writer, where I feel that I don't know, that they bridge certain things. And some of the very short pieces, I think, are like that. A thing that I definitely learned, or rather, another thing that I kind of talk about a little bit in the introduction is that I have long known that I love women very much as a orientation towards the world. That is, I have often also felt that this is a sort of how can I put this? I'm not going to say problematic, a perhaps challenging thing to say is that I absolutely, when I meet people, find myself sorting them internally in my head into loves women, doesn't love women, hates women. Like there's just a kind of a sort of instant understanding. And people can be perfectly pleasant, nice people to interact with. Many of them in my own family, but who I just kind of, and women as well, to be clear, are not exempt from this. Many women knowingly or unknowingly truly do hate women. And so but it has felt like a sort of guiding principle in me for a long time that no, I actually really love women. It's just a thing. It is just true. I think that it was reassuring to see that over the course of these stories and over the course of all that time, that is something that hasn't has only changed in terms of like deepening, essentially, gaining kind of more depth and color and resonance. And that was reassuring only because another thing that has sort of proven true for me over the course of time is that every generation sort of invents new ways to hate women, and as depressing and terrible as that sounds, and so just seeing that within my work, which can often be a kind of mirror that you to yourself, uh, that I just that continues to just be a very true thing at the heart of me and how I approach things.
Yeah, it is a lovely, I think, unifying idea for the volume, and it comes through in so many different, say, flavors of stories and moods and tones and so many different pieces. When you're ordering them, maybe guiding principle is like a little bit too strong, but like, is there any sort of art? Do you look for like an emotional arc or like
Mm.
a thesis, or is there like a movement if you want to talk about a music
Oh
term?
yeah.
Yeah.
I love curation so much. I love the possibilities it offers. And every time I would wistfully think to myself about a collection at some point in the future, the opportunity to organize the stories in a way that would make them hopefully into more than the sum of their parts was always a kind of keen ambition that I had. And I mean, I used to edit a poetry journal called Goblin Fruit with my friend Jessica Wick, and then later with my friend Caitlin Paxson, who also has a book coming out this month. If I could just shout it out, it's called "The Widow's Charm," and I'm delighted by it. It's a lovely romantasy romp that I adore. Anyway, that aside, so curation though is something that I in every issue of this magazine that we had always felt like kind of sequencing tumblers in a lock, you know, that there would be some way of putting stories together that would crack something open and make something more emerge from the whole of it. So that was definitely the goal. In terms of approach for this, there was a combination of I think we were, and I say we here because this was a conversation and kind of collaboration with my editor, Ali Fisher. I think there was a textural approach, basically, like a sense of wanting to vary moods and lengths, points of view, and tones. Like I think musically is a good way of thinking about it, especially because I read so much of my work out loud as I'm revising and figuring it out. So there's definitely an element of, to me, like every story has colors in my head, like colors and textures. So trying, I think, you know, the more I think about it, the more I think it's a little bit like organizing a gallery wall. And I say gallery wall as a not as like in an art gallery, but like as just like in your home, if you've got a big expansive wall. I am not by any means as skilled at this. I just did it one time and felt like I learned a lot from it. But there is a kind of harmony that you're trying to find between colors and shapes and the ways in which they inhabit the space, so that when you look at them, there is a sense of movement, but also a sense of wholeness. And I think that is maybe the closest tactile thing to the way it felt to put these stories and poems together, because that was the other thing where length is concerned. Do you like there was a degree to which I could feel the poems becoming almost a kind of punctuation, or like the shorter stories as well, feeling like a kind of punctuation between larger phrases of story, if that makes sense. So all of that kind of factored into it, especially because a couple of the poems are accompanied by translations into Arabic that my father did actually. So I really like, I feel visually there is a kind of pausing or dwelling there, because you know, for an Arabic speaker I would hope that it would be like, what what is happening? For a non-Arabic speaker it'd be like, wow, something opaque and impenetrable is now occurring, except that it, you know, they're facing each other translation wise, so there is still, my hope is that it still lends something to someone experiencing the collection, even if they can't read the Arabic. But it was very important to me to have it there for those poems.
Oh, I love that. The idea that your father translated them is really gorgeous. I'd love to know if you watched that unfold at all and if you saw drafts or, that must have been like a really lovely collaboration. And yeah, I was curious about like how the poems function in that rhythm because some of them feel like they serve different purposes in some places. Like some are punctuation, but some feel like, a breath or a little spotlight or like an
Mm,
aside, like a Shakespearean
yeah.
aside.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of how the translations came about, my the first time my dad translated a poem of mine into Arabic was Song for an Ancient City, which is a love poem to Damascus that I wrote after visiting Syria for the first time in, I think it was 2007. And I just fell completely in love with it and wanted to write something about the feeling that I was having. I'd literally I'd literally been, and I was on this trip with my dad, to be clear. It was the two of us there. And I just remember having had this experience of going out into the city and coming back to our hotel feeling covered with a thin layer of dust. Essentially, there's like construction and things going on. It was like, dry place, but I could feel like there was this layer on my skin of dust, and I was writing to a friend and saying, I find myself not wanting to wash it off because it feels like washing the city off. And she said, you should write a poem about that. And I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. I should do that. And that became that poem. So when I showed it to my dad, eventually he was very moved by it and didn't tell me he wanted to translate it. But one day we were sitting at the table together, like the dining room table, and he just sort of said, Binti, tell me how much of this you understand, essentially. Because I speak Arabic fluently, but I read and write it at like a fifth grade level, basically. And so he just started reading me a poem, and this is something he's done a bunch, to just share poetry with me periodically. And I started listening to it, and within a couple of lines I was like, wait a second, what's going on, what is happening? And I started crying and stuff, and he'd just taken it upon himself to translate it, and it just felt like this beautiful gift that he was giving me, because I can't I can't write poetry in Arabic. I don't have that fluency. I don't have that because I don't read in Arabic, and it's very much a language of home and family and childhood that mostly only exists for me in those spaces. I speak English and French as well. I feel like I can write poetry in French, but it's difficult because also I don't. I mean I went to school in French. I grew up in Quebec. Again, I'm fluent in it, but I'm not I'm not creatively engaged in French in terms of reading and absorbing literature a great deal. I want to be more, but world enough in time, basically. But Arabic feels so much less accessible to me creatively, despite the fact that it was my first language growing up. Like, I don't remember thinking in Arabic, but my parents reliably tell me that for my like up until I was about 3, that was what I spoke almost exclusively at home. And But it was just so quickly taken over by English and French growing up in Quebec. So it just felt like my dad translating this was sort of giving me this gift and opening this bridge or this path to say, this is still yours. This is still something that you can access, and I will give it to you for as long as I can, essentially. And when I wrote Qahir, it was a very different circumstance, about as different a circumstance as you can imagine. Song for an Ancient City is just this celebration of something that I love, and Qahir is about just grieving atrocity and learning a word for a kind of grief that you don't want people to experience. It's just an obliterating kind of grief. And so they are very polar opposites, but he translated that as well. And then for the book, though, like the in both cases, these were not collaborative. In that case, he just went and did this and gave them to me. But when it came time to put them in the book, and I told him that I wanted them in the book and I wanted his translations there, he wanted to revisit his translations and update them. So there was in fact a collaborative part there where we were talking. Like, he would ask me, all right, so when you use this word, these are the words in Arabic that I'm using. What do you think of this? This has more of this resonance and this has more of that. And it was, excuse me, a just deeply beautiful conversation that we were having with each other about that. He also worked with a family friend, Ahmed Asfahani, who lives in the UK and who is like, they go way back, basically. And I think my dad sees him as the more literarily accomplished. He's a journalist and reads a great deal. And he consulted on some of those. and it was lovely. But in terms of my dad and I talking, there came a moment too where he was reflecting on how this reminded him of his father, when he and his father were living in the same house for a while, and that in adulthood, and that they would both be working on writing in the same room and just periodically like looking over at each other's work and talking about it. And it was profoundly moving to think that we were having something like that. There was just this kind of continuity or lineage there. My grandfather was a poet as well, and who wrote a great deal of poetry, and that just But I only ever knew him in very young childhood and stuff. So there's a little bit of feeling those like generational bridges stretching and really just appreciating it.
Wow. That's absolutely lovely. And that idea that you just mentioned before, helping somebody find their language or giving them back their a lost language,
Mm.
actually links up beautifully to my favorite story in the
Oh,
volume, Florilegia.
oh,
Just a quick confession, before I was a librarian, I was a medieval historian. And so,
really?
yeah, I was very
Oh,
excited to read this one. And I do have a question about sort of the origins of this story and, rendering, oh gosh, how do I phrase this? It's sort of like how language is expressed in this story, because it's
mm.
so heart-achingly beautiful.
Thank you so much. That means so much to me because I deeply love that story, and just because of the nature of, it having been originally in a print anthology, within, science fiction fantasy circles, that usually means fewer people will read it, paradoxically, like versus it being published online and the circulating more widely. But I really love it, and I don't often get to hear people tell me it's their favorite story, so that makes me happy. So yeah, so Florilegia is based on the Welsh story of Blodaweth from the Mabinogion, and it's about woman who, well, the story of Blodaweth is that these basically wizards make a woman out of flowers to get around a curse that a goddess has made on her son that she was like tricked into giving birth to and stuff. She decrees that her son will never be a man because he won't be able to have weapons or a wife or a name. And then these wizards trick her into giving him a name and weapons, and then they make him a wife out of flowers to be like, look, here you go, now you can be a man. And the thing is that Blodaweth, has no say in this. She's just made to be a wife. And in the story, she ends up falling in love with neighboring lord, and then, works with him to murder her husband. And then the wizards intervene again and turn her into an owl to punish her for doing this. And I have always been of Bladaweth's party. Like, I have always been like, this is bad. I don't like this. She did nothing wrong, as far as I'm concerned. And I find that story so compelling, not just because of, wanting to see, like wanting to avenge women's wrongs and stuff, but also just because it's so the colors of it or like a woman is made of flowers and then turned into an owl, and there's so much attention paid in the story to which flowers she's made of, and all of that is dazzling to me. So I feel like I keep writing about this story. Like The Truth About Owls is another story in the collection that is tangentially related to it, but does explore those ideas of what a florilegia is. Like just that word. I mean, I remember, I've always been so drawn to medieval history while knowing that everything that I know about it is seen through the distorting lens of my own scholarly period.
Yeah.
So, I, for my sins, studied 18th and 19th centuries, and so lots of romanticism in particular. And the romantics sure did love making stuff medieval wrong. So there's, there's a lot of always wanting to check, and Victorian medievalism is a whole thing. So it's always been fascinating to me how much the so-called Middle Ages are this locus of like projection, essentially, like fantastical imaginary of like a lot of different things. But so I wanted, whenever I think about it, I always want to try and be as honest as possible to what is exciting me. So at some point I learned about how many households, rather than have like many books, would have a single or a couple of books that would be compendia, essentially, of lots of different miscellanies. So you might have like inspirational religious passages next to story cycles, next to, various other things. And that these, anthology, is anthology the same thing? Or I can't remember now. But like that florilegia means a gathering of flowers,
Mm,
essentially.
mm,
And I just loved the idea that, a book is a gathering of flowers, and Bladaweth is also a gathering of flowers. And how much is any person a book ultimately of all of the things that have happened to them, and to what extent is that other people writing you, or you writing your own story? All of that was just really compelling to me. So I wanted to, give Bladaweth her flowers, essentially, in this story. And yeah, and just like let her let her have a happy ending that I like. So, yeah.
I do much prefer your ending than
Thank
the
you.
traditional one. And it really got me thinking a lot about, like, a lot of my research was about sort of women as wives, as political agents, and sort of
Oh,
like
yeah.
the symbolic function that
Hmm.
they served in these things. And I remember reading a poem about an Italian princess leaving her family and going across the ocean to marry a man
Mm.
she had never met. And the story reminded me of that poem and got me thinking about, like, like translation as moving across an ocean, and like
Mm.
translation, you're leaving behind your mother tongue and you're adopting a new
Yeah.
one in a new land, and
Yeah.
translating yourself, she has to suppress all of these parts of herself in order to fit into the small box that is this marriage in the story.
Hmm.
And it felt like I like to use that old Colbert word truthiness, where it's just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's yeah, there's something essential that it touches.
Absolutely. And I think that there's, gosh, I know I wrote this somewhere. Oh, it might have been in The River Has Roots, but we talk about things being lost in translation, but there are also often things gained. And I think that that's something that is just such a potent thing that you can say about any movement from one place to another. And I think that's also, it's just one of those things that I love about language, is that when you get used to using the word translation to mean running one language through a filter into another language, you lose the mathematical sense, of translation as a movement of an object in space to a different place. Or, like there's the fact that translation means movement, and that we don't really bring that concept into the word itself a lot. But if you allow yourself to, then you gain more dimension to it. It's part of why I loved R.F. Huang's Babel so much. Like that that book just felt like it was telling me so many things about my own experience of language already, of just the things that you notice when you are just in between languages enough, there are things about Arabic that I notice that my parents don't, because they take for granted those things. Like if you want to say somewhat, where do I start this? The word for street is شارع, but if you say to someone, "Don't argue with me," you basically say like ما تشارعني. So like, don't street me is the literal translation. And so, if you are a sort of, a diasporic person who's learning Arabic alongside English, you kind of wait, this is the same word. Like the word for argument and street are the same. And then my parents go, "Oh, Yeah, I guess that is true, and just like they get a window onto the language that they take for granted because I'm on, like, I have that extra layer of distance.
Mm.
So I feel like things come in through that distance as much as, what it means is that I don't have the fluency that they do. It does mean that I also have this weird distorting perspective that I think a lot of like poetry can grow out of and just creativity can grow out of. So yeah, there's just a bunch of stuff like that. Weird little just like grace notes essentially of language that please me.
Yeah, and I think that you can see those, if you want to call them gray zones or those like little productive gaps, that could be either
Mhm.
terrifying or really empowering. I guess it's like
Yeah.
that sort of the existentialist, or nihilist, coin side type thing. Like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
are you going to do with that freedom?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly.
Well, what is on your horizon? I know that you are promoting this book now, but are you writing at the moment right now or?
Yes. So, like I said, Max and I have been working on another co-written book together that we have been revising a great deal. Like it's been complete, and we are kind of just trying to find its ultimate shape. So that has been the bulk of what I've been working on. It's one of those things where it's like, oh, we've got a new book coming out, and then all of the other work that you're doing is not of stuff that will be, coming out soon. But or with screenplay stuff, who knows? We'd love to have good vibes about that, but it remains, work that we're doing and enjoying, but that is not up to us whether or not it's ever experienced by anyone else. So the other things on the horizon right now are the next thing I'm going to write is a novel, and that is, while I am not yet at this moment working on it in terms of like hands-on keyboards typing it,
Mm.
it has been living in my head for a long time, and it's actually an elaboration of one of the stories in the collection, which is the Green Book. So I've been wanting, ever since I wrote that short story, gosh, in like 2010, I think is when it was published. I have had a world in mind that I want to return to and that I want to write a novel in. And that is I really feel the next thing. I feel the urgency of it's been percolating for a long time, and it has gained an urgency lately because the core of it is this is a world where there is a kind of where the magic is from reading essentially. Like magic is something that happens to you by way of reading, and but the magic depends on there being a writer and a reader. And the more that this absolute toxic sludge poison awful badness of like generative AI and LLMs enters this space that I think of as holy,
Mm.
and like of profound and like barely utterable importance to me and my whole deal, the need to like write against it feels so crucial. So, I've been able to enjoy these years while I've been percolating it, just kind of taking for granted, like, yeah, people will want to read a book about how important reading stuff yourself is and writing things yourself. I mean, I believe that people think those things are important, and then to be just confronted over and over again with the extent to which I was wrong about that is really upsetting.
It is.
and and it does, it makes the project gain a certain degree of urgency laced with anger and spite, and just kind of, there is more propellant behind it now than there was. So it feels very important to get to, and I really hope that, I don't know, one kind of doesn't want things to be timely per se, like especially publishing is a slow moving beast. I would love for this book to emerge into a world where actually this problem has been solved, and we've all come to terms with the fact that this is bad and doing bad things to us and our brains and our lineage and stuff. But so that's my hope, that it will just be fully redundant. But in the meantime, it just needs to be written so that I can get things out of my body,
Mm.
essentially.
Well, I can't wait to read that. And yeah, I do think that is everything that you have just said. I agree with. And, something that I thought a lot about reading these stories is, how much like myth and myth
Mm,
inspired material feels like sort of like a dream, right? Like, because they kind
yeah,
of have like
yeah.
dream logic. They're a little bit surreal. Like, there's like a
Mm,
touch of magical realism, but it feels normal within the world. And I think that's like the thing that AI can't do, right? Because like myths are sort of like the collective unconscious dreaming, like, and it's
yeah.
like there is no unconscious for AI. There is only the conscious. Like,
I think the thing is, the thing that most upsets me about it, and I keep coming back to this because, like, I feel like I am sharpening this thought more and more as I encounter people who are very, like, very smart and very thoughtful, offering up what they see as like ethical use cases for these technologies and stuff. The thing that most upsets me about them, or maybe not, but like one of the things that I don't see discussed enough is they are they're like people have been calling them plagiarism machines, and I do think that's accurate. But what they are in addition to that, and that sounds like the same thing but is actually different, is they are anti-citation machines.
mm,
They are machines that break the sequences of our scholarship by simply like this is one of the things that the LLMs are just extraordinarily bad at, is citing anything, right? They will make up citations. They might offer accurate information but cannot show you how they got that information that was accurate. And in so doing, they break this chain that we should be able, like all scholarship is based on, which is showing where you are in the body of knowledge that we have about anything. We are here in this place in knowledge, and it is because we are standing on the shoulders of people, standing on the shoulders of people, standing on the shoulders of people. And what it's doing instead is just breaking that connection. That terrifies me. Like, that is the idea that there might be, generations of students who don't understand how to research from that angle, that their research is not just about, producing an accurate result or like writing a passable paper, or but that is about specifically their engagement with as much of the body of human knowledge that we currently have, so that they themselves can contribute to it in a way that is speaking to both the past and the future. That, like, the idea that these machines can sever our connection to the dead is actually like it is just horrifying to me. It is, and the fact that this is something, the idea that people could take for granted, this miracle to me that we can, through the medium of text, know what a person who lived thousands of years ago thought, what they thought, what they wanted, what they experienced, because they wrote it down and like sent it into the future where we are. And the idea that we could invent something that erases that, or that erases the importance of that and the connection to that, is so profoundly upsetting to me, when this is truly something that, like, the act of writing and the act of reading are to me like sacred things. And then yeah, so that just gotta write about that. Gotta write those feelings out because I
so
sure do have them.
so yeah, no pressure there. That's
No,
it's not.
just gotta convince the whole world to
Yeah.
take reading and writing as seriously as I take
Yes.
it.
It does remind, I could talk about this for hours and I will let you
Yeah.
go shortly. But when I used to teach and students would come to me and worry about like, oh, should I do this major, that major, this?
Mm.
And I would tell them, I'm like, it doesn't really matter. Like you are in college to learn how to think, and so
Yes.
you could pick whatever you want to learn
Yeah.
how to think with, and then you're going to apply those skills to like the next thing that you want to learn. And
Yeah.
by bringing in AI, you're just like that's literally the part. Like the point isn't the paper that you produce, it's the thinking that you did while you were writing the paper. So yeah.
The best metaphor that I have seen, for the one that's most resonant with me, is it's like you've brought a forklift into the gym. Like, what are we doing? No one, I wish student, like, if I also, when I was teaching, like, I stopped teaching, like, I think 2 years before this became a going concern in the classroom. And if I could just truly impart to students the degree to which no one wants to read first year essays. Like,
Yeah.
this is none of us want to, you don't want to write them. We don't want to read them. It's a necessary thing that is happening so that you can learn. And
Yeah.
then once you have learned to do this, you will be able to write better things that I will want to read. And seeing that progress is the thing that I want to see. But, reading middling, opinion piece about stuff that I have thought about a lot, like, no, I want to see you learn. That's
Yeah.
the thing I want to see.
Yeah.
So, that's where we're here. But anyway, yeah, I also could talk about this
Yeah.
forever, clearly. Thank you so much for indulging me.
Oh,
But yeah.
thank you for indulging me. It's been absolutely lovely. I love this collection, and I think it's a very impressive collection. And I think it's the pieces run from 2008, I think you said, to 2023. And it's just
Yeah.
really lovely to see the things that stay the same and the things that grow and expand and, shift.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot to me. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Listeners, please check out Seasons of Glass and Iron. It's absolutely beautiful. By the time that you hear this episode, it will be out in the world. So head to your favorite bookstore or library or website, wherever you like to go for books. All right, it is time to close this chapter. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.